We're going to start off section 17 a little differently with a supply chain perspective right out of the gate, the alphabet soup of ocean transport. You will see why we're taking this approach in just 1 second. One aspect of global trade that can be very confusing is the vast number of acronyms that are used to describe any number of services, activities, and physical locations. Ocean freight is certainly no exception to this phenomenon, and the slightest variation of an acronym can dramatically change how cargo moves. Second paragraph. When dealing with ocean freight and different services like full container load, less than container, or buyer's consolidation cargo, it is very important to not only understand what each acronym means, but how reference is made to them on an ocean bill of lading, actually appearing on an ocean bill of lading. For example, the acronym CY/CY on a bill of lading signifies container yard to container yard. This signifies an FCL load that is being transported on a port-to-port basis. A container is spotted at a factory overseas. It's filled by that vendor, drayed down to the container yard, and shipped to the container yard at destination. CY to CY. When that appears on an ocean bill of lading, we know right away that it's a full container move on a port-to-port basis. Third sentence, conversely, a CFS/CFS reference on a BL signifies loose cargo being tendered to a container freight station, there's the CFS part, at origin, which will be consolidated by a freight forwarder and sent to a container freight station in the U.S. for subsequent deconsolidation. When we see CFS/CFS on an ocean bill of lading, that tells us something too, usually that it's LCL cargo. The following sample bills of lading help to illustrate this point. Let's have a look. The first one we're going to look at is a sample ocean bill of lading for a factory load CY to CY move. As we've said previously, the most basic of ocean moves. A vendor fills up an ocean container and ships it on a CY to CY basis, port-to-port basis. We will say that many of the fields on these bills of lading and other documents that we'll show have been blanked out because they're real documents. We want to protect the anonymity of the actual shippers and importers. But let us stress that these are actual documents. Of course, we have to fill out the shipper, that's the vendor overseas, the consignee, that would be us as the importer, the beneficial cargo owner. The notify party would likely be our customs broker. The port of loading was Yantian. We have a Seaway bill number about halfway down the page on the right-hand side. We have the name of the vessel, a little difficult to pronounce, but the name of the vessel there. The voyage number we talked about in terms of the needed fields that have to be filled out on a bill of lading. Port of discharge, Long Beach. Place of delivery, Carson, California. Carson being right next to Long Beach. For purposes of our conversation and what we spoke of in our opening supply chain perspective, here you'll see what reveals the type of move it is that we're talking about. A CY to CY move, a port-to-port move. We will note freight payable at destination. That means a collect freight charge. The importer here is going to pay the ocean transportation. We have gross weight and measurement. On the right-hand side, we see 51.940. That's cubic meters, and it looks like 18,345 odd kilos, or roughly 18 tons. This bill of lading actually continues on in a 2-page document so we can get a little bit more detail about what's going on here. This is the same bill of lading, just a little bit more detail. What do we have here? We will note marks and numbers, a seal number, some purchase order numbers. This would have been the purchase orders placed on the vendor overseas by the U.S. importer that are now being referenced on this container. Why would they do that? So the importer knows what merchandise, what POs are covered in the container. We see it's made in China. That makes sense. The port of loading was Yantian in South China. Quantity in pieces, that's one 40-foot container. Said to contain STC, we spoke of this. That is where the shipper loads the container. Shippers load and count, to use other terminology. 1,445 cartons. And there's that gross weight again. 18 tons, 52 cubic meters. And then some further detail on those POs that we mentioned just a moment ago, which again is not unusual and actually quite helpful for an importer to have that information on the bill of lading so that they can cross-reference what POs are being shipped and in what quantities. We see the PO number, the item number of the product itself. We see an HS code. That's the Harmonized System Code. Let us be clear and state that U.S. Customs and Border Protection does not mandate that HS numbers, product classification numbers, be on any documentation, never mind a bill of lading. This particular importer obviously has instructed the freight forwarder to do that, the freight forwarder who prepared this bill of lading. It's not a requirement by CBP. But each PO is listed by carton, by eaches. We'll notice under that first PO, it's 18 cartons and 720 EA. That means eaches. 720 pieces in those 18 cartons with its weight in kilos and CBMs. With the exception of the HS number, which is fine if it's there, it just doesn't have to be. This is a detailed and well-prepared bill of lading that helps the importer and their supply chain partners, the customs broker, the freight forwarder, the vendor too, know what's coming in, not just based on a bill of lading number, but purchase order numbers, item numbers, and quantities of items too. Let's talk about BLs for LCL freight. Very similar idea, but a little bit different. Not unlike FCL shipments, LCL cargo also requires a bill of lading. Noted previously, because LCL freight is consolidated in a container with multiple shippers and consignees, each shipment must have its own bill of lading, that house bill of lading. To reiterate that point in our third bullet, each individual shipment in a consolidated container is known as a house ocean bill of lading, sometimes referred to as a hobble. A quick note, the following slide points out some distinctions between FCL and LCL bills of lading. That FCL bill of lading we saw was a CY to CY move. It was explicitly shown on the BL. Let's check out the next one. As you will note, it looks very similar, does this bill of lading, to an FCL bill of lading, with some clear distinctions. Once again, our shipper, consignee, notified party, etc., all blanked out. This is an actual LCL bill of lading. We are interested in what goes on in the middle part of this document. What do we have here? We will note under pre-carriage by CMA CGM Verdi. That's the name of a ship owned and operated by the third largest steamship line in the world, CMA CGM. Loaded in Manila, the Philippines. But we will also notice the name of another vessel, the Hyundai Tacoma, with its own voyage number and a port of transshipment at Busan. This tells us something very important. That this cargo started out in the Philippines on a CMA ship, but was transloaded in the Korean port of Busan and put on the Hyundai Tacoma. Hyundai being a South Korean carrier. That makes sense. We'll notice our bill of lading number to the right. Port of discharge, Los Angeles. Our previous example was Long Beach. They are two different ports, even though sometimes people think that they're not. But look here, and this is where the big difference comes into play from our FCL example. Place of delivery, Los Angeles CFS. And right to the right of that, the movement, CFS to CFS. Cargo in less than container load quantities was tendered to a CFS at origin, in this case in Manila. Was put into a consolidated container, shipped from Manila, transshipped over the port of Busan into Los Angeles, and comes into where? Another CFS, but this time in the U.S., a bonded container freight station to await customs clearance. Freight payable at destination. This is a collect freight charge. Moving down, we'll notice number of packages, 16. Description of goods as per attached, freight collect. We had 288 kilos, 3 cubic meters. So clearly, 3 cubic meters is greater in volume than 288 kilos. This is a voluminous shipment. Whatever it is, it's a voluminous shipment, so we know that too. What we also know is that although it's blanked out, the NVOCC, the consolidator, has tendered the cargo moving on this bill of lading for co-loading services. So there were not only 2 ships involved, there were 2 NVOCCs involved. The master loader who built the consolidation and another freight forwarder that tendered this small shipment to that master loader. Now, might this seem a little bit confusing? Sure. But just by looking at the body of this bill of lading, we can learn a lot about shipment types and their characteristics. That's what we're trying to illustrate here. Albeit brief, a rather telling document in and of itself. We have a bunch of other documents to show, but we're going to cut this section here and pick up appropriately on forwarders' cargo receipts. Do come back soon.